So this is a brief explanation of the Royal Proclamation of 1763. In 1763, the British assumed sovereignty of a huge area of North America after what was called the 7 Years' War. I call it the First World War because it was a fight between all the nations of the world about who was going to possess these colonies outside of Europe. And Britain basically won and therefore defeated the government of France with respect to the territory that was called New France, which was all of what was now Canada and a great part of central United States, including right down to the mouth of the Mississippi River, the Louisiana Territory. And all of that went from French ownership into British ownership. Also Florida, which had previously belonged to Spain, became British. And that also includes not just Florida, but also Alabama and Mississippi. All of that became British. And the Royal Proclamation of 1763 was the governing document, the founding constitution of these territories. And it stands for 4 things. British sovereignty, first of all. Secondly, that it would be a government of democracy. So assemblies were set up. The first time that there was democratic assemblies. Next, that there would be the rule of law. Courts were set up. And the Royal Proclamation says, in order to enforce the rights of the rights and liberties of the inhabitants. Now, who were the inhabitants in Canada? They were the Indigenous people. And they were called the several tribes and nations of Canada. And so what the Royal Proclamation does is it creates a court system where the land rights of the tribes and nations can be enforced. And what were those land rights? That's the other major thing that the Royal Proclamation does. It says that the Indian nations will retain possession of their lands, and it's trespass to go onto those lands without permission, until those lands are formally sold or surrendered. And they can't just be casually sold. It can't be an under-the-table deal. It has to be a formal meeting of the whole of the nation in the presence of an officer of the Crown, at which the whole of the nation indicates their consent. And the purpose of this was to prevent underhanded dealings and improvident transactions. In fact, they're described in the Royal Proclamation as great frauds and abuses. So looking backwards to the time before 1763, there had already been takings of Indian lands that were considered to be fraudulent and abusive. And so the idea was, starting in 1763 with the assumption of British sovereignty, that would end. That from then on, there would be land rights protected, constitutionally protected for the Indigenous people, and there'd be a court system where they could enforce those rights. Well, it didn't exactly turn out that way, especially in some parts of Canada, such as British Columbia, where the spirit of the Royal Proclamation and the law of the Royal Proclamation was disregarded. And that's why, to this day, there is unresolved land issues in British Columbia that are being resolved through either a treaty process or through court processes. The biggest examples of the modern treaties are the treaties under the British Columbia Treaty process, such as the Manulf treaties on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and successful court cases such as the Silcotin case. In 2014, the Supreme Court of Canada declared that the Silcotin people have Aboriginal title to their lands. All of that is grounded in that basic law set out in 1763 when Britain assumed sovereignty of North America and declared that it would be a democratic place governed by the rule of law in which the rights of the Indigenous inhabitants would be respected. Thank you.